Hello everyone, this is 3DX and welcome to another video on how to create a stylized material within Substance Designer. Now if you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the playlist for Substance Designer that's on my channel if you want to see how to make other stylized Substance Designer videos. So right now I think we have over 80 videos on how to create many different types of stylized materials within Substance Designer. And in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another stylized material. In this case, I'm going to be making a stylized wood board type of material. Now this type of material would be useful for something like a wall texture or maybe even a floor type of platform. That's kind of how I'm intending this to be used. And so what I'm going to do is, well, what I did was I created a few shapes using a tile sampler, which if you ever need to, splatter some shapes around, I always recommend using the tile sampler. Or if you're looking to create some geometric shapes or patterns, I also recommend using the tile sampler. So in this case, I used it to create the main shapes of the wood boards. And then I just kind of used a non-uniform blur just to create a little bit of kind of like a bevel to it. In this case, you could have used a bevel, but sometimes I kind of like to use this non-uniform blur because it gives you the bevels, but also gives you that really soft edge to them. So after that, what I did is I used a few nodes just along with the warp to create the fibers of the wood. Now there are a lot of ways that you can go about creating wood fibers, and this is just one of those that I decided to use for this video. So I used that and just kind of blended that in with the main shapes that I created from the tile sampler. Now typically I used a curvature smooth node from the normal map to create things like the color map, and I connect that through a gradient map as well. So in this case, you would notice that I used a distance node along with a flood fill and a flood fill mapper. So I used that to kind of use the wood fibers through that, so that the wood fibers are not uniform, so that they their shapes kind of move around within that shape of the wood boards. So that's how I use that node. So it's really useful if you ever need to add like noises to a texture, but you don't want it to look uniform. You don't want it to look like you just splattered a texture on top. So use that technique to kind of separate the details so that it doesn't look like you just uniformly added a noise to your texture. So later I also created a shape node in this this time instead of using a tile sampler. And so I used that to create what would be the metal pieces that are going to essentially be connecting some of the wood boards, just kind of holding those together. So I used that and I just kind of created the shape by blending a few nodes as well. And then that shape I kind of splattered around by using a tile sampler and setting it so that it's using that shape as the input. And then what I did pretty much was I used a height plane to combine those two essentially, just making sure that the metal pieces are coming through on top of the actual boards of wood. As it typically goes with Substance Designer materials, there's a lot of experimentation that went into the making of this one. Sometimes I try a few different nodes just to see what results I'm getting. So I also added a bit of a warp on the main boards, just so that there's a little bit of variation to it. And then I also passed that through a slow blur as well, just so that there's more chips on the edges of the wood. And then for the metal parts, I wanted to add a little bit of surface variation in the form of a cells 1 node, just to add a little bit of that look that, you know, this has been hammered with the hammer, basically, just so that it looks more like hammered metal and it's not a completely flat surface. So whenever possible, if you can, adding some surface variation to something typically helps your materials to look just a lot better instead of having something that's just completely flat. Mainly because when the light hits it, you can kind of see some of those details, and if you don't have those, when the light hits the surface, it's just gonna look just kind of flat and plain and not as interesting as if you add some more, you know, details to that. So one thing I did was I used the wood fiber node that I created, and I just added that on top of the color just so that there's more color variation and just so that the wood fibers read a lot better in the actual color map, because previously they were just doing a little bit too flat. Then one thing I did also was to mask the metallic parts from everything else. One thing I did do was I set the metallic to not be not to be 1, so it's not fully metallic, it's just slightly less than 1. And I do that mostly on stylized assets, just because I think that when you set something fully metallic, it just doesn't look as stylized as when you set it to be less metallic. And obviously I also added some color to those pieces, so that there's a difference between those and the actual wood. And I also masked some of the edges a little bit so that there's more, so it looks like there's a little bit more rust on it as well. But I didn't want to go too overboard because this is a stylized material and you typically don't want to get too noisy with the textures. Then the final thing I did was I obviously got the roughness map for this. In this case I used the curvature map and just kind of reversed it a little bit. And one thing I did, I just made sure that the metallic parts were shinier than everything else, of course. And then one last thing I did, I decided to add just a little bit more color variation to the wood. Just because I felt like it was still looking just a little bit too plain, and so I wanted to add just a little bit more variance to that. And then just change the colors of it as well, just a little bit. It also helps make it look more like the some of the crevices are look more like just dirt instead of completely clean. So I think that looks a lot better than it did before. Then the last thing I was just checking to see what it looks like with different the different number of metal parts that are connected. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Here's the render within Marmoset toolbag. Now if you're new to the channel, as always, I recommend you subscribe, hit the like button, and hopefully I'll see you in a future video. So take care, everyone. Do you see this environment right here? I made this really quickly using Maya, ZBrush, Substance Painter, and Substance Designer, and Unreal Engine. You too can make something like this really easily and in a short period of time. To make an environment like this one, all you have to do is make a few simple props, put them together in Unreal, and then simply add some lights and you're pretty much done. So hey, this is only a 45-second ad, so there's not enough time for me to cover everything, so click on the link below now and I will show you exactly how I made this environment. The best thing about learning how to make an environment like this one is that you can simply use the same techniques to pretty much make any other type of environment. Oh, and by the way, you don't need to be an expert already in order to learn how to make something like this. You can follow along without any prior knowledge. I will be showing you the basics on how to use Maya, ZBrush, Substance Painter, Substance Designer, and Unreal Engine, so you can follow along without any issue. Like I said, this is a very short video, so I don't have enough time to explain everything. So click on that link below and I will show you exactly how this is done. And by the way, I don't know how long I'm going to be doing this for, so click on that link now so you don't miss out.